welcome back to my channel. Happy October everybody, because now it is October, which is of course the best month of the entire year. So today we're going to kick October off with a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise ranking video. Now I had the pleasure of being sick last weekend and I decided to binge watch all 7 of the original Nightmare on Elm Street movies. We are not including the remake in this list because I just couldn't bring myself to watch the remake and get sicker because of it. We're also not including Freddy vs. Jason. I still haven't seen that and I kind of want to rewatch the Jason franchise before I watch Freddy vs. Jason, so that way both the Nightmare and the Friday the 13th franchise will be fresh in my mind. So let's go ahead and get straight into the video, but first I do have a special guest with me here today I'd like you guys to meet. It's Freddy himself, you guys. This is a drawing I did back in 2019. It feels like it wasn't 2 years ago, but it was. So here's my drawing of Freddy Krueger. I thought this would be appropriate for today's video, and yeah, he can actually join us here for the rankings of his movies. He's a little bit scary, so I'm gonna put him over there. We're going to be talking spoilers in this video, by the way, in case you haven't seen the franchise yet. So let's go ahead and start with the worst Freddy movie in my opinion. Number 7 on the list is Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. This came out in 1991. Now the synopsis reads, murderous ghoul Freddy Krueger has slaughtered every last child in his hometown. He ventures on to a new location, scouting fresh young victims to hack up with his finger blades. He arrives in a small town in which his long-lost daughter Maggie works as a therapist for troubled youths. He attempts to recruit her for his pursuits, but she has other ideas. First of all, as you can see by the synopsis, what is this story? Freddy's killed everybody in his hometown, so now he has to move locations, and now he has a daughter. Since when did Freddy have a daughter? This movie's just all over the place. It doesn't have as fun of dream sequences and kills as some of the other Freddy movies, so it's not like it's making up for it in entertainment value. There's a strange Final Destination-esque plane sequence at the beginning that I didn't really understand. You think you're going to get a final boy for once, but then it turns back into a final girl situation. In this movie, they decide to dig into Freddy's past even more than they did in the other ones, and this gives me somewhat of the remake vibes. When Freddy is finally killed at the end of this film, he explodes, and then we get the 90s effect of his head, like, coming out of his mouth and then coming out of his mouth again as he's screaming, and then he explodes, and there's these weird serpent heads kind of spinning. And that's how the movie kind of ends. The point of the matter here is this movie should not have existed. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the franchise very well. It has some 90s vibes that I was digging, but besides that, it had absolutely nothing going for it. And there was really no point to making this movie. Freddy could have been dead in Dream Child, and there was no reason to make another movie that was just so awfully bad. Moving up a little from the bottom of the barrel, number 6 on this list is Freddys Revenge. This is Nightmare on Elm Street 2. This movie came out in 1985. It is a sequel to the first film, and the synopsis reads, Jesse Walsh moves with his family into the home of the lone survivor from a series of attacks by Freddy Krueger. There, Jesse is bedeviled by nightmares and inexplicably violent impulses. It turns out Freddy needs a host body to carry out his gruesome vendetta against the youth of Springwood, Ohio. So in this film, the rules from the first movie are kind of thrown out the window here. In this movie, Freddy needs a host. He needs a body that is living to possess and carry out the murders for him, which he obviously didn't need in the first one. So why does he need that now? Why did they decide to make this into a possession movie? I don't know, maybe they didn't want to follow too closely from the first one, but this movie just came out kind of offbeat. It was really weird. There weren't a lot of scares in the movie. Freddy wasn't very scary. There were a lot of boring parts that kind of dragged. The third act was really weak in my opinion. I don't know what was happening in the third act. When I watched this movie, I thought it was odd how there was so much sexualization of some of the male actors in a really weird way, and then I was listening to a podcast from Horror Movie Club, which I listened to, and they were talking about how there's a weird gay subtext and how it kind of ruined the actor's life or something like that. So I don't know what they were trying to do. This is not a true Freddy movie, and it just doesn't fit in with the rest. It's the odd one of the bunch, and I just didn't really like it. I don't think I would choose to rewatch it at all. Now coming in at number 5, we have A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Dream Child. So Dream Child is a mess. But what it has over the previous 2 movies we just talked about is it's actually pretty entertaining. They're kind of leaning into the comedy at this point, but we're getting a lot of really entertaining nightmare and death sequences in this movie. So let's read the synopsis. This came out in 1989. The 5th installment of the popular franchise focuses on Alice, a survivor of the 4th, who believes Freddy Krueger has been eliminated for good. She optimistically hopes to start a life with fellow survivor Dan. The nightmares begin soon enough though, and Alice learns she is pregnant. When her friends start dying, Alice suspects that Freddy is using her fetus within her as a weapon. Can she fight the demon while protecting her unborn child? So since when does Freddy need a unborn fetus to enter the dreams of Alice? I don't understand. I think what they were trying to do with this one is break up the repetition from Dream Warriors and the Dream Master. They want to do something original and new, but I didn't like this story about our final girl from the Dream Master, Alice, then becoming pregnant, and now the father of the child, Dan from the Dream Master, dies very early on in the Dream Child, and it's actually very sad. And then her father seems to be okay with Alice having a baby even though she just graduated high school. In the Dream Master, the father was a totally different character, and now in the Dream Child he is totally okay with this. In this film, the subtext we get is the crazed pregnant woman, and everybody thinks that she's just crazy and nobody believes her. Now that all being said, there were some very entertaining and funny aspects of this film. We get a fetus doll that we get to see in utero. That was very interesting. We also get to see a Freddy demon baby. That's right. A Freddy demon baby. This should have been the last movie in the franchise. If this was not a sign, then what was? So next on my list, number 4, is The Dream Master. This movie is from 1988, and the synopsis reads, child murderer Freddy Krueger returns to haunt and kill yet another group of teenagers in their dreams. Really? That's the synopsis? Okay, IMDb has a slightly better one. Freddy Krueger returns once again to terrorize the dreams of the remaining Dream Warriors, as well as those of a young woman who may be able to defeat him for good. So this is where we're introduced to our final girl, Alice. I love Alice as a final girl in the Dream Master. Now the one thing is, I did get off on the wrong foot with this movie, because at the beginning we get our final girl from the Dream Warriors, Kristen, but Kristen is played by another actor. It's not even the same, it's not even an actor that looks anything like the actor that plays her in Dream Warriors, and it kind of threw me off, and I started off kind of on the wrong foot with this movie because of that. It was just a totally different actress that just didn't look anything like Kristen, and then they kill her off, of course, at the beginning. So that's where we get our new final girl, Alice. I love Kristen as a final girl. It was sad to see her go, but it wasn't even her. It was a different actress. I didn't have a lot of issues with this movie. It was pretty decent. It falls kind of in the middle here for me. As a Freddy movie, it fits in with the rest of the franchise just fine, and it's still entertaining enough to not have you falling asleep during the movie. So now we've gotten to the top 3 of the franchise. Coming in at number 3 is Dream Warriors from 1987. During a hallucinatory incident, young Kristen Parker has her wrist slashed by dream-stalking monster Freddy Krueger. Her mother, mistaking the wounds for a suicide attempt, sends Kristen to a psychiatric ward where she joins a group of similarly troubled teens. One of the doctors there is Nancy Thompson, who has battled Freddy for some years before. Nancy senses a potential in Kristen to rid the world of Freddy once and for all. You guys, I love Dream Warriors. I kind of wish it was just the sequel to the first one and that Freddys Revenge didn't exist. It's honestly one of the more interesting storylines here, and we get Nancy back as a grad student, and I don't know how many years this is supposed to take place after the original, because I think Nancy is something like 16 or something in the original, and now she is a grad student and she is working at this psychiatric ward and studying dream patterns, behaviors, things like that. It's very interesting. Now, Nancy unfortunately does meet her demise in this movie, which of course you can't have the same final girl, you know, for the whole franchise, but Kristen was a perfectly fine final girl. Now, what I like about this movie a lot are the nightmare sequences, the kills. We get a giant Freddy head trying to swallow Kristen. We get one of the characters being moved like a puppet by their veins and then thrown off a window or off a balcony. This was a very creative movie. The kills were really creative, and I thought that it was a good sequel. It went a little more over the top than the first one, as sequels do. I'm just gonna call it a sequel from now on because Freddy's Revenge just should not exist. But it goes over the top more than the first movie did, but it's a great follow-up. And Freddy is in his original spirit. There's no new weird things that he needs in order to be able to enter the dreams of these teenagers. Now, for second place, we have Wes Craven's New Nightmare from 1994. Reality and fantasy meet in unsettling ways in this installment of the long-running horror series, which finds director Wes Craven and actors Heather Langenkamp and Robert Englund all portraying themselves. As Heather considers making another film with Craven, her son Dylan falls under the spell of the iconic disfigured villain Freddy Krueger. Eventually, Heather must confront Freddy's demonic spirit to save the soul of Dylan. You guys, I actually thought this movie was so good. It is really well made. The story is interesting and original enough that when you're watching it, you're not exactly sure what is happening or what's going to happen in the end, because it doesn't follow the same plot as all the other movies. It's a little different. We have a different version of Freddy here, and we're following the actors from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I almost said Friday the 13th. But we're following the actors themselves as Wes Craven is writing a script for a new Nightmare movie, and then consequently causing things to happen to the actors that are happening in the script. It's just very interesting. I don't think it's particularly scary. I wouldn't say that it's extremely scary or anything like that, but I think that it's really creative and interesting and a good watch. We aren't really following the dream sequences like we are in the other movies. It's more like Freddy is slowly being manifested into reality, which I thought was really cool. The reintroduction of Nancy, which is actually just the actress Heather, of course, really brings more life into the series. Again, it was great to see her again after she met her demise in Dream Warriors. The only thing I wish this movie had was some more Freddy time. We don't get quite as much Freddy time as we do in the other movies. And of course, as you guys can already guess, my #1 spot goes to the original Nightmare on Elm Street. This movie came out in 1984, and I'm gonna read the synopsis just for the heck of it. Several Midwestern teenagers fall prey to Freddy Krueger, a disfigured midnight mangler who preys on the teenagers in their dreams, which in turn kills them in reality. After investigating the phenomenon, Nancy begins to suspect that a dark secret kept by her and her friends' parents may be the key to unraveling the mystery. But can Nancy and her boyfriend Glenn solve the puzzle before it's too late? As we all know, it was far too late for Glenn. So this movie's at the top of the list because it's hands down the scariest of the movies, of course. This is the most original of all the stories, although I have to say Wes Craven's New Nightmare was pretty original too, but this movie is just straight up scary. The body bag scene at the school, all the dream sequences are just totally chilling. Johnny Depp being sucked into his bed. There's just a lot of horror in this one. This one's one of the more true horror movies. It's slightly campy, of course, we get those 80s effects in there, but nothing close to as campy as the other movies. Freddy doesn't go totally off the deep end. He has some interesting one-liners, but he is nowhere near as campy as he is in the other sequels. I absolutely love Nancy. I love the dynamic of this Nancy against Freddy thing. We have such a strong protagonist and antagonist in this film, just going head to head. It's really kind of one of those types of films. It's a very Final Girl-esque type of film, and I just love this movie so much. I think it's really creative. and I like to rewatch it at least once a year or so around Halloween. But I'm assuming you guys expected that number 1 would be in my number 1 spot. So there you have it, you guys, my ranking for the 7 Nightmare on Elm Street films. And yes, I know the remake should be in this list. I just didn't want to put myself through the torture of watching the remake again. I'd like to know your rankings for the Freddy franchise. Feel free to include Freddy versus Jason if you'd like to, and the remake if you'd like to. Sometime in the future, I'm going to do a Jason franchise ranked. I promise I will. I just have to get myself to rewatch the Jason movies, and sometimes I'm just not in the mood for the Friday the 13th films. I have to be in the right mood. They're very distinct slasher, straight up slasher movies. So I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. Freddy over there certainly did. I'm going to put him back in his portfolio sleeve now so he can't creep me out anymore. And I'll see you guys in the next video with more spooky October content, of course. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!